Thank you, Chima, for a kind introduction. You can hear me, right? And thank you for coming. Last day of conference. It's, yeah, everybody is tempted to escape. So I start with a beautiful view of beautiful campus of University of Chicago in the fall. It's relatively warm. Oh, and thank you for having me here, by the way. Okay, why it's not moving? Huh. It looks like I stuck. Yeah. Rather blunt title of my talk, sorry. And without a hint of humor, I'm terrified with what's going on today in the world. It's some psychotic playwright, I mean, just horrified. I can share, Pavel, the picture if you'd like. Okay, and usually I start with how much life changed in the last few hundred years. I was walking in the museum, in some European museum, and came across this wedding portrait of Princess Adelaide de Savoy. And it's curious because she was 12 when she got married, and she was 26 when she died. And that's the time when basically some people are struggling to publish first paper or defend thesis or, yeah. And people ask me what happened to her. Basically, it's like bad Monty Python sketch. Everybody died from infection. First, father of Princess' husband died from smallpox, and then both Princess and her husband died from measles. Yep. And I found portraits of these distinguished people. So basically in the 17th century, even the most privileged classes had worse healthcare than uninsured people today. And there are a lot of those actually in the area where I live. And actually, you don't have to go that far in the past to realize that many things changed dramatically. I just collected some ads from recent good times. Well, obviously, computers were bigger. And for just under 3,500, you can buy 10 megabyte disk, right? But most importantly, these things changed in terms of everyday life. Amphetamine apparently helps you to reduce weight, right? Butter is good for you, and you should eat it early. And liquid paint, lead paint, is apparently big innovation. Marlboro is good for mother and for father, and apparently child is also right there. And television benefits you. Sugar can be willpower you need to undereat. And cocaine apparently good when you have toothache. Yeah. Oh, and of course asbestos. Asbestos pad is fantastic. So my point is that many things that were usual then became completely no today, right? And I'm pretty sure that many things that we use in the kitchen or in the bathroom, I mean chemistry, will be banned in a while. We just don't know yet. And a good example is Nobel Prize in medicine was given to Hermann Müller. This dichlordiphenyl trichloroethane, also known as DDT. It's first synthetic insecticide. It was a huge breakthrough. Actually, it was a breakthrough because it completely eliminated malaria in many areas. And this is Long Island. Powerful insecticides harmless to humans. And look at this small guy who stands in the cloud of DDT. Yeah. So it was used to treat lice, it was used to eliminate malaria, and of course, it's also poison that accumulates in fat tissues. And Rachel Carson's famous book put light on that. So we still have DDT accumulated in food and everywhere. It's almost indestructible. So a little bit my personal journey. I started close to genetics, nature, and with time drifted towards environment, nurture. So you can think something like this. And now I'm convinced that environment contributes to our health at least as much as genetics, probably much more, because many things quickly develop. Many diseases are very common, which were unheard of in the past. Okay, and some definitions. What is complex disease? You of course know. Basically, everything simple when we know cause. It could be Mendelian disease, sickle cell anemia, or cystic fibrosis. Infectious diseases also fit this because we know the cause. And the rest of diseases are complex. Another disclosure, I am roaming globe trying to access data sets, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, in very exotic areas, such as Stockholm in December. And most of the data sets use International Disease Classification System. In case of Sweden, it's 8, 9, 10, 11. So you have to cope with changes in diagnosis. And for example, 8, I think, doesn't have autism at all. And data looks like this. For example, this particular patient is 15-year-old Hispanic female who got unspecified viral infection at age 6 and so on. So it's kind of grim history of somebody's life. By the way, please, if you have questions or something, ask, because I'd rather be sure that you are awake. Vital signs, you know. And the data sets, biggest data sets I'm working with is insurance claim in the United States, about 200 million unique people, which is a little bit creepy. Well, actually, what Lars is working on is even creepier because it's whole country, right? Well, this is about 2/3 of the United States. So if you live in the United States and you're insured, good chance that you're in this data set. And it's, well, now it's 20 years, day level resolution. And just to give you feeling, it's whole paper about this. It's in influenza. Each frame is 1 week, and it's about 9 years. And you can see influenza is sweeping United States always from south to north. It's seasonal influenza. And question is why? And basically, I'll keep you hanging there because I have another whole paper about this. But it's just to show you that resolution of the data. And of course, data is imperfect. For example, if you look at different diseases, they have the same yearly cycle. There's strange dips and increases. Can you hear? Yeah, I know that some people know why, but can you guess? Memorial Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas. For some reason, people don't go to a physician on Christmas Eve. Okay, and for those who are not from genetics background, I'll give some definitions. Heritability formally is proportion of phenotypic variance explained by additive genetic model. Basically, simplest model, everybody knows that it doesn't work, but that's how heritability is defined. And genetic correlation, it's roughly shared genetic variants affecting more than one trait. For example, the same trait can affect resistance to malaria and predisposes to sickle cell anemia. Okay, and Kanix Wang, I always try to, he's now a professor, he's great, former graduate student. So what you can do with this, with insurance claims, because you have insurance policies, you have a main person and other people on the policy, which is kind of approximation of a family. And that way you can get actually to genetics and environment. So you can look at variants of phenotypic variants, disease, no disease, and partition it in parts attributed to genetics, environment, shared by couple, and so on. Just to make it simpler, parents share environment. Typically, they're genetically unrelated, although it's not always the case. It's not general situation. Siblings typically have siblings shared environment and half genetics, and parent and child shares half genetics, right? And this way, you can actually get a very large data set. We got about 500,000 people, about 120,000 families, and we estimated heritability for a lot of diseases for which heritability was not estimated. And we compared it to previous estimates, and it's pretty well correlated, although there are some outliers like dermatitis, for example. It's for some reason outlier. And if you look at our family estimates and GWAS estimates, they're also pretty well correlated. Now, if you look at correlations, environmental correlations and genetic correlations, you can see, for example, that for psychiatric diseases, it's a mess. They're very, very highly correlated both in genetic and environmental space, which kind of tells you that, is it politically correct to say that our classification of psychiatric diseases is crappy? Can you say it? Yeah. Yeah, and of course, given my past history in evolutionary biology, when you see matrix like this, for geneticists, it's matrix, it's just published, right? But I can't resist making a tree, because you can, 1 minus correlation gives you distance matrix, and you can have classification of diseases from correlation genetic or environmental. And as you can see, in psychiatric space, it's red labels. It's also a mess there. Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. Some unusual things, for example, migraine is clustered with IBS in genetic space, and arthritis in environmental space. Well, actually, I won't spend too much time, but this classification is very far from ICD classification. So ICD classification does not reflect commonality of etiology of diseases. You're still with me? Okay, and right about this time, people typically start kind of drifting away. So I'll give you a metaphor, hopefully. Yeah, and it's a little bit bad timing because many of us are flying soon. So my metaphor is complex disease and this particular air crash, which happened in 2003. So phenotype, a plane took off, stalled in the air, and in 37 seconds crashed. And in this particular case, typically when somebody crashes, people do careful investigation. And it turned out there are 2 causes that contributed to this thing. One of them I call genetic, because it's a structural defect, and another one is environmental, because it's what happened in this particular day. So genetic thing, they have cable which connects pilot to tail elevators, right? And this particular cable was too tight, so it wasn't full motion. It wasn't by itself lethal because plane did many trips, but there was also second cause. So this is cable. And second cause was environment. It was actually overloaded. And why? Because at this simple time, they counted passengers and multiplied them by average weight of a passenger. And during decades before, when it was done, calculation, Americans became stronger. About 20 pounds or 9 kilograms more. Sorry, I hope, yeah, it's acceptable. And I like this photograph because you see on the bottom this iconic photo of workers, and it was recreated recently, and you can see actually contrast, right? It's construction workers, it wasn't really kind of selected population. Okay, so my point is it's some kind of epistasis or collaboration of environmental and genetic factors. So it's insufficient to look only at genetics, as geneticists do, or only at environment, as epidemiologists do. Ideally, you would look at both. Okay, and now a little bit about closer to text analysis and AI. And so, yeah, it's Genji Jia. He's also now a professor. I'm very proud of him. So what we did, actually with Denmark data or Swedish data, it will be perfect. But with 20 years in US data, you can also do this analysis. You can kind of have grim sentence of somebody's life from birth to grave. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. So it's a kind of sequence of diseases which becomes a sentence. And those sentences, we have about 151 million of them, less than 200 million because not everybody has many diseases. And we used Word2Vec to embed those diseases into a 20-dimensional space. Don't ask me why 20, because, yeah, I don't have a very good answer. But it shouldn't be 100 because there are not that many diseases, and it shouldn't be, say, 3 because it's too few. But basically, you put diseases into continuous space, and diseases that are similar in semantics come together. So yeah, that's another way to put it. It's projection to 3-dimensional space, and roughly diseases with the same etiology are very close to each other. By the way, sorry, I have tendency to show a lot of pictures in attempt to keep you awake, and also I like pictures. Yeah, this is Mendelian versus non-Mendelian. They are actually scattered because there is no clear pattern. And again, you can use this to construct a tree. You can see a tree, but if you look inside, say here, you can see that, again, diseases with similar systems, similar etiology are close together. So question is, yeah. And it's 20-dimensional space, so you can see that, for example, depression, learning disorder, conduct disorder, they're different, but very distinct, say, from infection diseases. So they're in different part of spaces. Are you with me? Thank you. Yeah. Okay, and you can think about most distant diseases. For example, OCD and acute renal failure are far apart because OCD is early onset typically, and acute renal failure typically for older. And also diseases, you can look at closest diseases. I won't spend too much time on this. We have 20 dimensions, and each dimension kind of orders diseases in some way. And you can think about this as a quantitative trait, like weight and height. Yeah, and diseases are not uniformly distributed in space. They are clumps or clusters, which we call constellations, I guess to be poetic. So this is constellation 6, for example, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, cardiac dysrhythmia. So basically diseases of old age. Yeah, and again, we use data from Sweden, Denmark, to kind of make sure that the results are robust. So this is autism and depression. Curves are different, and it's diagnosis probability at particular age. This US versus Denmark. Okay, you might ask me, why bother? Why do jump all these hoops? And I'll show you a couple of applications. First, you can estimate heritability without any genetic data. So yeah, and it's again Genji Jia. What you can do is use embedding and known heritability estimates and known correlation, environmental and genetic correlations, to estimate genetic heritability and correlations for diseases for which we don't have data. Okay? And under the hood, of course, you say AI, you open hood, and it's regression, right? So the best performing model is kernel-rich regression, and it has reasonably high correlation with real data. Yep. Okay, yeah, this is heritability, actual heritability on X and predicted on Y. It's pretty good, actually, if you look at the equation. And it's worse for correlation. It's a little bit more kind of dispersed, but it's also reasonably good. And yeah, basically it's the same point, that it's high correlation with real data. And another application is using embedding for predicting complex diseases constellations from genetic data. Basically, if you know genetics, what is the probability that somebody, for example, develops a depression? And it's hard task, maybe a little bit meaningless, because there are a lot of environmental factors which are not considered, but you still have signal. So we used 20 dimensions as quantitative traits, and we did whole genome association analysis of each trait using UK Biobank. We discovered 116 genetic associations and 108 unique loci. Okay, this is the, many of those associations are new. And then you can use just this 180 loci to predict future disease, as well as you do with, actually slightly better, as you do with polygenic scores specific to disease. So I think it's kind of a small achievement. But to be fair, the best prediction accuracy is about 60%. So it's not mind-blowing. Nothing to write home about, actually. Okay, do we still have time for environment? Sure?
You have time for a quick question.
Yes.
So you're using word-to-vec embeddings of the diseases, which of course means you're only going to get one embedding for each disease. And sometimes the same ICD-10 code might actually hide several different diseases under the hood, right?
Yeah.
Have you considered taking these grim sentences and training some fairly small transformer model on it to get
Yes.
context-specific embeddings and that way be able to discover subtypes of diseases?
We did think about this, and we even tried, but it's still kind of work in progress. Okay. But maybe, yeah, maybe we can discuss. So environment, right? It's can of worms. I told you that we have many, as this philosopher said, there are unknown unknowns, right? So we don't know how many, I hope everybody knows who this is. There are millions, billions, trillions of potentially relevant factors. And just to see in the United States that it matters where you live, for example, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Idiopathic means in medicine that I have no clue why. It's basically exclusion diagnosis. But you see, it's something is rotten in California kingdom, right? Because it's very prevalent in California and in New York, which has bigger population, it's much less prevalent. And this is bipolar disorder. So center of United States is more bipolar, and it's also more depressed. And the question is whether it can be explained by some environmental data. So Atif Khan, who also left my lab for gainful employment in a company, he probably has much better salary. Yeah. So he did work in collaboration with Denmark colleagues about air and psychiatric disorders. It's actually interesting that Denmark is much cleaner than the United States, but they have very good data, and both on quality of environment, and they can trace every person trajectory through the country, so they can compute accumulated exposure over first 10 years. And because of this great data, signal is much stronger. And in the US, we have only 2 time points, EPA estimates of environmental quality. So this is EPA data. Air quality, water, land, built And also we computed good weather days and bad weather days, defined as at least 4 hours of comfortable for good days and at least 4 hours of very hot or very cold. So technically you can have both one day, both bad and good. For example, if you have scorching heat in the morning and minus 20 at night, which is possible, right, in some places like Moon. Yeah, so air quality is fairly good. It's kind of continuous as it should be. But if you look at water quality, it suspiciously follows state lines, which make me to suspect that it's cheating. And actually talking to people who actually do those estimates, yeah, there are a lot of gaming going on about water quality. So do I need to explain mixed effect regression? No, right? Well, I would love to talk about this paper, first paper by Ronald Elmer Fisher. Great paper, very, very influential and horribly written. I really show my graduate students that there's way not to write paper because it's page after page after page of equations without any clue why he's doing this. Seriously, if it wasn't Fisher, yeah. So I won't be explaining you regression, but basically you have fixed effects, known, and every Ramsfeldian thing goes into random effects, unknown unknowns, and you get factors that you can measure, and you get effect on disease. So results, accounting for everything that we can account for, we show that in US, air quality, these are subtiles, right? So left bar is best air quality, right bar, 7th bar is worst air quality. So it gives about 29% increase in prevalence of bipolar disease. And in Denmark, it's even more dramatic, not because Denmark is dirtier, but because data is better. Denmark colleagues estimated 162% increase in personality disorder, 148 in schizophrenia, 50 in major depression, and 29 in bipolar. You still with me? Yeah, and we get some resonance, yeah. So, and now about something entirely different, now it's interactions. Yep.
May I just ask, what's your assessment? I mean, the correlations are clearly there, but would you say that this is causal, or is this just a marker? I mean, if you have bad air pollution, maybe these are just rundown places in town, or industry is because there's no high land value and things are just economically depressed, and therefore that hits people as well, or would you argue that there's a causal relationship?
Well, I'm not allowed by my lawyers to say causality thing, right? But we accounted for everything we can account for. For example, for income, for medium income, for population density, for percentage of unemployed, poor, and so on and so on. Even urbanicity and yeah. So it's possible, but it's getting less and less likely that it's something else. And there is animal model study, more than one, numerous actually, that show that when you put, say, dogs to highway crossing, they got inflammation in brain, and it mimics depression and other things. Okay, and little bit small vignette. Another great sibling, Hanxin Zhang, who we lost to medical school. He got PhD and went to medical school. Who does that? Yeah, but so he's looked at, for example, schizophrenia and for interactions. Because it was done after we did air quality study, we accounted for air quality and again for everything we can. And everything water, land, built doesn't register as significant, air is significant, but what you can do is to change old estimates of heritability, which is quite high for schizophrenia, and take into account interactions, individual, sibling, couple, family, so gene by environment. And as you can see, the best model has heritability much smaller, and huge portion goes to interactions. And yeah, it's the same setup. Basically, you have family. Actually, it's even the same data set, about 500,000 people. So estimates of heritability change drastically. And if you look at other diseases, psychiatric diseases, it's not uniformly true that heritability drops. But for many diseases, much of the variation goes to interactions. And why is this important? Holy Grail is essentially if you can find factors of which interact with genetics, you can design personalized life strategy. For example, don't live in very hot areas, or don't live in New York, or don't live in California, or yeah, don't become a welder. Okay. So appropriately for this section, we used large data set, and we looked at both environment and genetics. Okay, so basically it's outline of what I just told you. And I typically like to finish my lecture with this advertisement posted by Ernst Shackleton for Polar Expedition, which I think is very appropriate for recruiting for graduate school. So people wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. I think it's beautifully written. And I'll stop here and take your questions if you have any.
Okay, yes, no, okay. No. Okay, so thank you very much for this interesting talk. So I'm gonna start with the question, and I will leave you time for the rest of you. So I'm very interested on the correlation between, or the interaction between genetics and environment, and obviously in some cases the genetic weights a lot. Obviously, in the case, for example, of rare diseases or diseases with the mutation has a very high penetrance. But in the case of common diseases, for example, when you analyze polygenic risk score or polygenic scores, there are some correlation, which actually you can see, I mean, correlation at the level of the SNPs that are actually very well reflect in the real correlation between the diseases. So if the environment would take it would have a strong weight, probably you will find this correlation, because in some cases, so probably we need to weight the type of I mean, the genetic contribution of any disease. So I mean, any factor. I don't know if I'm asking the question properly, but obviously, depending on the disease, on the complex disease, the genetic has a more or less weight. So you have sort of estimated in which case is the genetic has more weight or the environment has more
Well, this estimates of heritability is roughly kind of showing you contribution of environment versus genetic versus interactions, right? And effect of environment is comparable to strongest Mendelian effects. So it's very, very strong. Because in genetics, having effect size 100 something is unheard of, right? Typically in GWAS, effects are very, very small. But environment...
but for example, in the case of when you are looking for disease trajectories, so that case, the different diseases have different effects. So the genetic has different effects. So maybe, I mean, probably some of the calculation of the trajectories are more or less affected by that.
Well, there are definitely a lot of hidden kind of problems. Yeah, we do the best we can.
You know, I'm sure. So I have more questions, but maybe other people. No, go ahead.
And once again, thank you for being here so early. And
Thank you. That was fascinating. I have two questions. One probably very quick. The first one is you said that you have tried to take into account as much as you possibly could, like with your data set. Problem is that your pollution data, for example, is completely confounded by the actual region. Do you think there may be also like a chance that some of your associations may be driven by culture that is within a certain place? For example, people in LA and people in New York are more culturally prone to seek for mental health help compared to other regions who may be just as polluted, but there is less of a culture of, say, for example, seeking help for mental health. So reporting.
well, it's definitely true that there are cultural differences. And this is especially clear if you look at medications. We looked at medication kind of spatial distribution, and some areas, more rich areas, prefer brand names, expensive drugs, and some rural areas have generics. So, and there are even fades. So it's absolutely true. It might be happening too with psychiatric things.
And my second question was, do you think, because I'm fascinated by now your concept of the interaction between genetic and environment now, like your heritability changes. Do you think there would be a way of connecting what you know from the healthcare data and the insurance data that you have, which is also spatial, I suppose, with your environment data that you are collecting and see whether the...
Well, we are not collecting environmental data. It's coming from Environmental Protection Agency.
Sorry, that you have acquired. Do you think you could test for an interaction between the two by checking how the heritability of certain diseases changes geographically?
Actually, I didn't put it in the slide, but we did try it, and that definitely spatial things.
Yeah.
Heritability is a very strange concept because you can get different heritability for different ages for the same disease. Yeah, it's a bit, yeah. Well, it's a good instrument, but it's not perfect instrument. Yeah, but it's definitely also changes with spatial thing.
What are you going to? Okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly ask, I mean, these are amazing data sets that you're working with. How hard is it actually for other researchers to get access to these? Was this a complex process, or is this as part of being in a consortium, or could in principle anyone look at these data?
In theory, anyone could. In practice, it's very painful. So
Thank you.
yeah, and it becomes even more painful with more kind of concerns about patient privacy and geopolitical situation.
Right.
Well, best case situation when you have colleagues who do analysis on other data sets. So people say in US don't even, I never seen Danish data, Denmark data, but
No, because there's no way we can transfer them out of the country.
yeah. I did see data in Sweden, but again, it's all built on trust, collaborations. And for US data set, again, in theory, anybody can get access. In practice, it's very, very expensive. And usually many researchers in university kind of chip in.
You have to buy them, okay?
Yeah. And for example, if you get new grant award, I pay 35,000 for using from every grant award market scan.
Thank you.
And it's a small fraction of what is actually paid for the whole thing.
Thank you very much.
So one more question on correlation, but on inverse correlation or anti-correlation. So have you cases on which one disease protect for another disease? Like, for example, there are some publications in which some mental illnesses protect from some cancers, or vice versa.
Well, in the slide which I showed with correlations, we have several cases of that, and they're well-established things. Well, the most famous thing, of course, is sickle cell anemia, which is disease, but in Africa, it protects against malaria, right?
Yeah, but this is...
But there are many negative...
This is environment at the end. Environmental. I mean, it protects from malaria because there is malaria, but...
True, but it's well, complex diseases obviously have both
Yeah.
genetic and environmental correlation, and sometimes environment predisposes to one disease and protects against another. But if you want specific examples in this matrix that I showed, correlation, we have several diseases with negative correlation in environmental space, and some of them in genetic space. Yeah.
Yeah.